Hey everybody, this is Christian. Happy New Year to everybody. So we are back in 2026 with a brand new tutorial. Today's one is about Pangolin, the open source identity-based remote access platform that is built on the sophisticated VPN protocol WireGuard, and that enables you to securely and seamlessly connect to private and public resources. Honestly, guys, once I heard some people in our community telling me about Pangolin, my first thoughts were, oh man, do we really need another one of these solutions? Some of you might know my favorite remote access platform is TwinGate. I'm using this for such a long time, but we've already covered some other open source alternatives like Netbird, for example. So then we had Tailscale, Zero Tier, not to forget Cloudflare tunnels. So yeah, there are already so many solutions like this out there. Why the heck do we need another one in the home lab space? But hear me out. Once I took a look at Pangolin, I found out that it does a few things a little different than these other platforms because it tries to unite three unique use cases. Yeah, it's a combination of a reverse proxy, which is using traffic under the hood. So with this, you can securely give access to internal resources using trusted TLS certificates and HTTPS. Plus, it has VPN capabilities, so you can run the main reverse proxy part on a public server and then route the external client's connections to local resources running in your home network. Plus, it has ZTNA capabilities, so that gives you granular access permissions and controls. And that is really super cool. So the plan for today is I want to give you a quick architecture overview to explain how actually works this magic under the hood. Then we will install Pangolin on a small VPS server in the cloud and connect a site running in my local home lab. Now, why do I want to host this on a VPS and not entirely in my home network? Well, this is one of these projects where running all of the components at home can get a little annoying. By the way, we will later take a look at the architecture overview to get into details, but just real quick, if you want to run the main controlling part of Pangolin, so this is where all of the clients, public and private authenticated clients, need to connect to. If you want to run this at home, you need to have a super stable public connectivity, ideally with a static IP address, because you need to have a DNS record for it. And you also need to open a few TCP and UDP ports, because otherwise the clients can't connect. And this is why I'd recommend, instead of running this critical service at home, install the main controlling part of Pangolin on a small VPS in the cloud. So then the platform is always up and running, and then you can still install the small Pangolin connector on your local network. So then you don't need any port forwardings or firewall exceptions. So this makes the setup a lot easier, which by the way brings me to the sponsor of today's video, Hostinger, because Hostinger makes it super easy to run and set up Pangolin. You can just spin up a new Linux VPS in a couple of minutes, pick any data center close to you, and then install whatever you want on it. Yeah, you can install any Linux distro, you can install the Docker host, Pangolin, traffic, and any other service you like. And what I personally love so much about Hostinger, their VPS are just super fast. Yeah, they use NVMe storage and modern AMD EPYC CPUs, and they also include super helpful features like snapshots and backups, which is just perfect if you're just testing a few things and you want quick rollbacks. And what is also super cool, Hostinger just added a brand new Docker management feature, which is, I think, really practical if you're running a couple of containers on your VPS, but you don't always want to mess around with SSH into your server for every little thing. Just access your Hostinger's VPS control plane, select the Docker manager to quickly see what's running, and then just start and stop containers. And you can even deploy new containers or change things in your configuration. I think for home lab style projects like this, where you still need a VPS for any remote access tool like Pangolin, it just saves you a ton of time and it makes things a lot easier, while you still have the full control over the operating system and how you want things to be installed. So if you want to build this setup alongside me, then just go to hostinger.com/lemper and use my code for an additional discount on yearly plans. Of course, you will find the link and the code in the description box down below. Alright, so now let's get started with Pangolin. First of all, I know this was already quite a long introduction, but I still think it is important to explain how exactly that works and talk a little about the official documentation. So by the way, this is really a great documentation where you get a lot of information about all the details, about the different terminologies like sites, resources, clients, what the heck is that and how does it work. I don't want to run through every little detail, but I think this is actually pretty important. Just like I told you, the Pangolin server, this is the main main central coordinating component for your network. This is the main place where all of the external clients are connecting to. So that needs to be always up and running. This needs to have trusted TLS certificates and also a DNS record, by the way, which is later done all by the installation script. And then you can still install the sites which are using the newt connector. So this is a little software that handles all the tunnel creation, the NAT traversal and routing across firewalls, so that you effectively don't have to touch any firewall rules, or you don't have to create exceptions, because it's initiating the connection from inside the remote network where you install the site connector to your public Pangolin platform. It's also interesting to take a closer look at the system architecture. This is Pangolin, that's the main controlling part. It's running the web dashboard, the API and the management system, the brain of everything to control it. And then you have traffic, the reverse proxy that handles HTTP, HTTPS routing, SSL termination, the Let's Encrypt certificates and stuff like that. And then it's using a traffic middleware called Badger. So this is a plugin that intercepts every connection coming from the users or clients, and that makes sure that the connections are authenticated to Pangolin before allowing access to the application. Then it's also using Gerbil, so this is managing the WireGuard tunnels between your remote sites and the Pangolin server, which is optional for some things, but it is certainly recommended when the Pangolin server is running on a cloud virtual private server and the edge server, so the site, your local home lab, is somewhere different. So there you install the newt client. This will initiate a connection first to the traffic reverse proxy and the Pangolin server to authenticate. It's using Gerbil to create this WireGuard tunnel. And then when somebody accesses the resource to your cloud VPS, it's then routing the connection through the tunnel to the internal resources securely. And then you can, of course, connect to any servers like port 443, port 80, SSH. All right, so to install this thing, there is a quick install guide that you can use. We will also use this guide because I think it's a lot easier to run the installation script. I tried to walk my way through the Docker Compose files and try to customize it a little, and then I found out, well, maybe it's a little easier to just use the pre-configured or the predefined installation scripts. Now, there are a few prerequisites that you definitely need to have. You need a Linux server with root access and a public IP address. Then you also need to have a domain name that points to your server's IP address. If you're using Hostinger, by the way, you get a .cloud domain completely for free for the first year. Of course, Hostinger also offers you to buy domains for a longer period, or different top-level domains if you like. Then you need an email address for the Let's Encrypt SSL certificates and for the admin login as well. And you need to open ports on the firewall. We're later doing this on the Hostinger VPS because there it's super easy to configure the internal firewall. Just make sure that you have open port 80, 443, and these other UDP ports that are needed for the WireGuard tunnel, so the data transmission. Alright, so let's just do this together. So I will copy this command and open a new SSH connection to my Hostinger's VPS cloud server. First of all, let's just paste the command. So this will download the latest installer version, and then we will run it. By the way, you can get a free enterprise version of Pangolin completely for free for personal usage, or if you're running a business making less than 10K US dollars annually, which unfortunately my business is. But hey, one of the benefits is that I get a free enterprise version of Pangolin, so I can say yes. And now we need to enter the base subdomain. In my case, I'm using sealcreative.de. And then we also need to enter the domain of the Pangolin's dashboard. So that by default will use the Pangolin subdomain .your base domain that you have entered. You need to make sure that the subdomain of your Pangolin dashboard, as well as all other subdomains that you want to use for publishing resources, are forwarded to the public IP address of the server where Pangolin is running. For example, I'm using Cloudflare as my main DNS provider. I've created a new DNS-A record for Pangolin on the sealcreative.de domain that points to the public IP address of the Pangolin's VPS server, as well as some other test entries that we will use later, for example, Nginx test 1, if we later want to publish a simple Nginx web server. All right, so then we just hit enter for the defaults, and we also now need to enter the email for the Let's Encrypt certificates. In my example, I just want to use info@sealcreative.de. And then you can also decide if you want to use Gerbil for allowed tunneled connections. I would say yes. You don't always have to use it, but if you say yes here, it will be easier to enable it later. And of course, if you want to have email functionality with SMTP, you should say yes. I think that is needed for registering or any notification emails and stuff like that on production systems. I would certainly recommend you to do this. And of course, if your server is IPv6 capable, I think Hostinger's VPS should be, so we will just go with the default. Also, if you want a simple database for a geo-blocking functionality, that is also the default. Yes, that will download and install this. Not really complicated. And now you need to finally confirm once more if you want to install and start the containers. Then you can also decide if you want to run Pangolin as Docker or Podman containers. Docker is the default. If you're a Podman fan for whatever reason, then you can choose Podman if you like. And then finally, you can also decide if you want to install CrowdSec. I know we haven't covered CrowdSec yet on this channel. It's certainly planned for somewhere this year, but yeah, this year just started, so I don't know when I have time for it. But don't worry, I will cover it at some point in the future. But if you're not familiar with CrowdSec and you don't need to mess around with that yet, so just say no, I think that's fine. And now your Pangolin setup is complete, so we will just need to navigate to this address. If you're then successfully redirected to the Pangolin's dashboard, you know that the DNS resolution is working and everything should be fine. You can also see here that it's having a trusted TLS certificate. Note this is not coming from Cloudflare because I've not proxied the connection. It's coming from Let's Encrypt, so that means that the HTTP challenge already completed successfully and Pangolin issued a trusted TLS certificate for that domain here. Alright, so now we just need to paste the setup token, put in your email address and a secure password. And that takes us to the organization setup. So create a new organization. It can be default, yeah, if you're just using HomeLab, just enter HomeLab. That should also be fine. So now we can directly create a site, but I think I will show you around a little before doing this. As you can see here, there are a few new options if you're familiar with older versions of Pangolin. Instead of just having public resources, you can also now add private resources, which are still in beta at the time of recording. The main difference between these two things is that the public resources don't need a client software and the private ones need. Here you can manage the clients. All right, so the domains you can also add here. As you can see, by default, it should have your base domain already in there. So in my case, this is clcrave.de, but I could easily just add another domain if I want. This is always a wildcard domain because the public facing or private services get a subdomain on this. You can also add a different certificate resolver here. I think this is only using HTTP challenges, so that is certainly something that could be improved by adding DNS support, but as the Pangolin main control part should be accessible from the public internet anyways, I think it is fine with using HTTP challenges for this use case. And here you can also create and manage new users. So if you invite somebody from your organization, for example, that invite link is available for a short time, for example, 3 days, set this as a member role, create the user, and then it's generating an invitation token that you can copy paste to finally create the user. And in the dashboard, you can also see logs and analytics about request logs, access logs. So you can very specifically see when somebody accessed what type of resource. All right, so now let's get back to the main dashboard. The very first thing that we need to do to connect to our HomeLab is to create a site for this. So just go to sites, click on add site, and then you can decide what type you want. Usually it is always recommended to use the nude site because this has all of the features. So I will just call this HomeLab. I think that should be super simple. The credentials for the connector are here, so make sure to not share this with anybody. And then you can decide how you want to install nude. So you can just run this on a simple Linux machine. You can run this in a Docker container using Docker Compose or a simple Docker run command. You can deploy this site as a Kubernetes Helm chart, so this will manage the deployment. You can run this as Podman. You can even run this on Windows or Nix OS machines, so it has a lot of different options. I would recommend running one on the Docker server, one on the Kubernetes, or maybe even on Linux, depending on how your local network is structured and how you protected this within the actual network, and if the machine where the nude connector is running has access to all of the services it needs to. That is the important part. We will just use a simple Docker run command. I think that's easier, but you can choose one or another. Yeah, that's totally fine. Let's click on create site. And this, of course, still has status offline because I haven't deployed that yet. You can also give this another identifier. Yeah, something like HomeLab server 1 or whatever. So now we can get to one of my testing servers, server test 1. I think I'm running a few Docker containers here. I don't know if I'm running Pangolin here. Probably not. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we can just execute this command and check. I probably should have searched for Newt actually, not Pangolin. That makes more sense. Yeah. So here, tunnel connection to server established successfully. So if this does not work, then you probably have some form of DNS resolving issue or some traffic problem. So note, this should not be a firewall problem on your local network, because this usually initiates the connection from inside your local network to the public Pangolin server. So if it cannot establish the connection, there's something wrong with the incoming connection to the VPS where Pangolin is running. I ran into this problem because I didn't pay attention to the prerequisite guide in the installation tutorial. But yeah, so here in the hosting or this VPS platform, by the way, when you go to overview, so you can get the details of your virtual private server. And go to security firewall. Here you can add the firewall rules to this machine. When you click on edit, you need to make sure that you're adding these UDP ports here, the ones from the quick installation guide, because otherwise the Newt connector cannot successfully establish the secure connection to the Pangolin server. But once you added these, it should work, and you should see this tunnel connection to server established successfully. And if we go back to the Pangolin platform and refresh the site, you should see the status is online. So that means the connection is established, and we can now start creating our public or private resources. Okay, so first of all, I want to start creating a new public resource. So for example, if we have on the server test 1 my Nginx server up and running, and I want anybody to access this, go to public resources, web-based public resource, click on add resource. So here we can say an HTTP resource. So that means the traffic reverse proxy of the Pangolin's platform is proxying the requests over HTTPS. Or you can see proxy requests over raw TCP UDP using a simple port number. So that depends on the nature of the service. Again, an Nginx web server is of course using HTTP, so we can use HTTPS, but if you're using an RDP server or an SSH server or something different, you need to use the raw TCP UDP resource, of course. We will use the subdomain nginx test1.sealcrave.de. So no, this is now important that you also added this DNS record here to your DNS provider and forward this subdomain to the IP address of the Pangolin server. Then we, of course, need to add the target configuration where the Newt connector will forward the connection request to. And we can now use the internal address of the Nginx web server. So this will be just Nginx test1 on the port 80, and then create the resource. And if we then open a new browser window on this URL, you should see that's our Nginx web server. And it's now completely accessible using a trusted TLS certificates that's managed by the internal traffic reverse proxy of the Pangolin setup. That's super cool, very practical, and really, really simple. Now, if we want to protect this, of course, we can just go back to our platform and enable the platform single sign-on. We can enable member roles, so any member can access it. It doesn't need to be an admin user. And maybe we add a PIN code protection, 6x0, which is super secure, of course. Yeah. We probably need to open a new browser window. And now you can see it's redirected us to the Pangolin's platform. We can now log in with our user credentials, or we can use the PIN code that we've activated. So that is, I think, super cool to quickly give somebody access to some internal resources. Like if you want to share your website to just one person, but you don't want this person to be created in your Pangolin platform, just create a simple PIN code, share this. Yeah, you can later deactivate this or change it. You can still protect this securely with a login, with one-time password, or these other methods here. Now, if you require somebody to actually install the Pangolin client and securely authenticate with your platform, you can add private resource. So these really provide zero trust private access, granular access control, and where you can specifically decide what users can do and what not. This may be server test 1, the SSH access to my server. The destination will be server test1.home.sealcrave.de, or the internal address of the server is also fine. And then you can specifically decide what TCP or UDP ports should be allowed, what should be blocked, and so on. Here, for example, custom, you can allow SSH, you can allow HTTP 443 for HTTPS, maybe something different. All UDP ports should be allowed, that's fine, and ping requests are also fine. And in the access policy, you can then select the users. Here you cannot use simple one-time passwords or something, because the users that need to access the resource need to have installed the Pangolin client and securely logged in with a user account, ideally with a member or maybe an admin user. I don't know. Other role admin doesn't exist. Yeah. But anyways, you can just select a member, for example. And then, of course, you need to go to users. Yeah. Here you can download the Pangolin client. So when you're doing this on a laptop, for example, like on my MacBook, you just need to go through the installation process, authenticate with your Pangolin user account, and then you can see the user devices in that Pangolin dashboard. It's really simple. And of course, if you have any automated servers or systems like CI/CD pipelines, or maybe any other servers, like, for example, you're running a VPS server on a cloud infrastructure that needs to still have access to internal resources of your home lab, you can install the Pangolin CLI or use a simple container to create such a client. I've not heavily tested this, to be honest, but I think it should also be super straightforward as any other process in this platform was. So I can really say this is an amazing platform. I really love this. It's super straightforward. It's well documented. It's open source. So there aren't any strong arguments against trying out Pangolin, to be honest. And yeah, other remote access platforms and ZTNA platforms need to keep up to this, honestly. Pangolin makes it super straightforward. It's very intuitive. It's really simple to connect any new remote networks using the sites, or give somebody access quickly on a public resource using a PIN or one-time password, or to securely give access to your team to private resources. And you still have all the request analytics. You can see from where the requests are actually coming from. You can see the request logs and all of that stuff. So here you can see there are probably some bots already trying to connect to my secured server. They already catched my new website and trying to connect to it, yeah, but there's no valid authentication because I protected it. So you can all see this. This probably should be a good idea to enable geo-blocking. Again, there are a few areas here and there I personally didn't take a closer look at, like two-factor authentication and stuff like that. You can enable this with an enterprise license. Again, this is free for personal use, so you can just enable it. And this really can replace Cloudflare tunnels. It can replace your VPNs, your remote access platforms. I think it's a great all-in-one centralized platform that is open source and can be self-hosted. So yeah, again, you hear I have many good things to say about Pangolin, but now it's your turn. So please let me know, what do you think about it? Will you use this? Will it replace any servers that you're currently using in your home lab? Please let me know. And if you're up for more content like this, then please don't forget to give this one a like and subscribe to my channel. That would be so kind of you. And thank you so much for any supporters of my YouTube channel or Patreon members. You guys are really amazing and make these free tutorials for anybody possible. So again, thanks for watching, and I'm gonna catch you in the next video. Have a nice day. Bye.